What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. Today it is my unique honor and privilege to review The Electric State, coming to Netflix on March 14th. I'll go spoiler-free initially, but in order to capture the totality of this movie's failings, I will have to offer some specifics in my review deeper into the video, but let's just get the necessary out of the way first. This movie's a strong contender for the worst film of 2025, and it already has some pretty healthy competition on that front, courtesy of Section 31. And judged purely on objective terms, The Electric State's not quite as bad as Section 31. However, when you look at the creative team behind The Electric State and the films that they have on deck next, well, then the situation becomes much more dire and much more alarming, because this movie was written by Markus and Stephen McFeely and directed by Anthony and Joe Russo. And if you're not familiar with those names, their previous work includes Captain America Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, and then things start to go off the rails with The Gray Man. And while The Gray Man might have been a pretty terrible movie, you can forgive a filmmaking team for slipping on the banana peel and delivering a turkey after so much success in a row. But The Electric State is a much more alarming slide backwards. I would say it's much more alarming to the Russo brothers' career than Rebel Moon was to Zack Snyder last year. And what made the Rebel Moon debacle so catastrophic to Zack Snyder is that there were 4 different Rebel Moon iterations inside of 12 months. So it's like, dude, just stop with all the Rebel Moons. At least The Electric State is just one movie, but it has enough of a budget where they could have made 4 movies if they'd wished to. The budget's $320 million, and that's being reported as one of the most expensive films ever made. And it's always a little bit difficult to get to the truth when it comes to the actual budget of these movies. But if all the Hollywood trades are acknowledging that this is one of the most expensive movies ever made, well then who knows what the real budget might have been, but this is going to be one of the most expensive, embarrassing disasters in the history of showbiz, because I think this movie is about to get completely, totally abused in the coming weeks. I mean, there will be South Park episodes about it. There'll be late-night talk show hosts making fun of it. Every form of online abuse you can possibly imagine. And I guess maybe the silver lining is Disney's thinking, well, we picked a really good time to release Snow White, which comes out the week after, because people will at least be distracted as to which movie they want to make fun of. But if you're wondering what the hell The Electric State is and how some of the world's most successful filmmakers got behind it, here are all the vital stats from Wikipedia. The Electric State is a 2025 American science fiction adventure comedy film directed by Anthony and Joe Russo from a screenplay by Markus and Stephen McFeely, loosely based on the 2018 illustrated novel of the same name by Simon Stålenhag. And let me add that I'm totally unfamiliar with the source material, but my understanding is that fans of the original source material are irate over the creative direction that the Russo brothers chose to employ for their interpretation of the material. But here's the official premise from IMDb. An orphan teen hits the road with a mysterious robot to find her long-lost brother, teaming up with a smuggler and his wisecracking sidekick. And I should also add that this movie is set in the 1990s, but it's an alternate 1990s. It's kind of a retro future 90s where in the 1950s, all these robots kind of rose to prominence and started taking over all the mundane tasks that human beings didn't want to do anymore. But they all had big cartoonish kind of Disney faces and that sort of thing. But at a certain point, there was a robot uprising, like we've seen in a million other science fiction movies, where they decided they were sick of taking out the trash and dealing with everybody's bullshit. And so there was a big, giant war. And it was a war that humanity was losing until this company Center came up with the ultimate secret weapon, these neurocasters. It's a little bit like putting on a headset to go into virtual reality, but it allows you to control other robots. And so through the help of those neurocasters, whatever the hell they're called, humanity was able to win the war and confine all the robots to this one area in the desert, which is like a little state unto itself of all the old decaying robots, and humanity lives outside of it. But humanity now more or less has kind of descended into this kind of dystopian hellscape where people just sit around kind of zoning out with these helmets on their heads all day, living in alternate realities as opposed to interacting with real people, real flesh and blood, etc. and so forth. But the main plot involves Millie Bobby Brown's character, Michelle, and she thought she lost her family in an accident many years ago, but now her little brother, who's this mega super genius, apparently is still alive, and part of his consciousness is locked away inside this little robot, so they have to set out on this road trip to kind of reunite him with his body, discover the truth, but it's all in an environment where, due to the previous war, robots are illegal and they're destroyed on sight and that sort of thing. So they have to team up with Chris Pratt, who also is a bit of a smuggler and kind of an outlaw, who also works with the robot sidekick. And, all sorts of mayhem and insanity ensue as they are tracked down by the character played by Giancarlo Esposito, who, through using one of those headsets that won the previous war, he's now the world's, greatest robot hunter. But I think I'm running the risk of boring myself to death just discussing the plot in detail. So let's talk about what went wrong and how did $320 million get spent on this just overwhelming, stinking pile of doggy doo-doo. Like Chris Pratt, I feel a deep swell of pity for him. I don't know what he was paid for this, so maybe I shouldn't feel sorry for him, but he seems so bored and so uninvested, and his performance is so one note. He just has this expression on his face in each and every scene, like, who do I have to fuck to get off of this movie? When is it going to end? Oh my God, like, is my career going to be in ruins after this? But Millie Bobby Brown at least feels like she's hurling herself into the movie in the most earnest, sincere way possible. She's just the victim of some really subpar material. But my question is Millie Bobby Brown a movie star, or is she just a Netflix star? And I feel like there's a distinction between a movie star and a Netflix star, because I feel like if you're a Netflix star, well, then you're in a lot of Netflix shows and you're in a lot of Netflix movies. And once again, she's one of the biggest stars they have due to Stranger Things. But can she open a movie? And my definition of a movie star is very simple, but it's an actor who they can open a movie in a big way, irrespective of the franchise. And Chris Pratt has enjoyed success at this point in different franchises, from the Lego Movie to Guardians of the Galaxy to Jurassic World, whatever the case might be. But he has been successful across multiple franchises. So Chris Pratt is a movie star, but he won't be for long if he continues to star in movies like The Electric State. It's a movie that's so bad, it's enough to make it conspiratorial that the filmmakers deliberately set out to make a movie that would be a failure. And I've been seeing some really strange, off-putting comments by the Russo brothers recently, where it does seem like they're trying to tear down and rebuild our notion of what a movie should be. They had this line recently where they said, we need to evolve beyond auteur filmmaking, and that they kind of resented the idea that a movie was being marketed as brought to you by the Russo brothers. And I guess when you're making movies as bad as The Gray Man or The Electric State, well, then maybe you would want to distance your name from the final product. But it's like, how about instead of saying we need to evolve beyond auteur filmmaking, say we need to evolve beyond making terrible movies and get back to making movies that people love? Because at one time, I was totally obsessed with the Russos. I can't think of a better example or a more alarming example of filmmakers that I was totally obsessed with that I'm now that I have nothing but complete disdain for, because that hot streak they had for Marvel between Winter Soldier and Endgame is probably the most entertaining and successful hot streak in pop culture entertainment that I can think of in the 21st century. And now I just actively dread whatever they do. And for a brief shining moment, I got excited when I heard they were coming back to the MCU to make Doomsday and Secret Wars. But judging from The Gray Man and judging from The Electric State, holy crap. Because if they continue to maintain this strange attitude about wanting to distance themselves from their achievements or not wanting to take ownership, they might willfully and deliberately destroy the MCU with yet another giant bloated production that nobody likes. Because The Gray Man was insanely expensive, and Citadel, a show that nobody talks about, it's one of the most expensive shows ever made. The only reason it's not more of a story is that it's kind of standing in the shadow of The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. It is the second most expensive show ever made. But I read an article about the making of, and the Russos, they were involved as writers and producers and directors, but they were kind of going in and out of the production in terms of the degree they wanted to maintain control over it, but they're also doing alternative cuts. But they basically drove up the cost considerably. And it's just it's a non-entity. It's like the antithesis of what a show or a movie is supposed to be, where whether you love a show or hate a show, you at least want people to talk about it. But Citadel, it's just kind of vanished into the fog, into the mist, never to be heard from again. And now they've made The Electric State one of the most expensive movies ever made, which, like I said, I think it's going to get eaten alive once that fucker comes online. And I don't know what it is about their filmmaking process that drives up costs so considerably, but Avengers Endgame, while one of the most successful movies ever made, is not as profitable as people would like to believe, because apparently the true cost of the film and the true cost of the marketing is so prodigious, the movie actually made less money than Joker. Like Joker, which had a comparatively small budget, which grossed $1 billion, was a much more profitable movie than Avengers Endgame, even though Avengers Endgame grossed over $2 billion. And so here's my prediction. If they're ready and willing to spend $320 million on this towering mediocrity, a movie with confused, muddled messaging and half-assed writing and uninspired action scenes and just idiotic humor from start to finish. If they're able to squander $320 million on this movie, which doesn't even have a ton of star power, it's got a little star power, but not a ton of star power, they're going to spend $500 million on Avengers Doomsday, and they're going to spend $500 million on Avengers Secret Wars, and given their current trajectory of their movies, I think those movies might be complete and total biblical level disasters. I would love to be proven wrong. If Doomsday and Secret Wars are fucking incredible and they're a return to form and they feel like Civil War or Infinity War, like make mine Marvel, I will applaud and cheer all day long, but I'm predicting nothing but doom and gloom based on their previous two movies. And what makes the situation involving the Russo brothers all the more strange and stupefying is that every time they make a statement publicly, it completely, totally backfires. Like recently, the Russos got in hot water for basically talking trash about the box office performance of Martin Scorsese's movies. They were reacting to the fact that Martin Scorsese has a dog named Oscar, and I think it was Joe Russo who said, "Oh, well, this is my dog named Box Office." Let me slow down and focus for a second, because I want to say this very clearly and very distinctly. When you compare the filmography of Martin Scorsese to the filmography of the Russo brothers, I would, if I was given a choice of keeping one frame of film from a movie like Mean Streets or Taxi Driver or Raging Bull or Goodfellas versus keeping the entire filmography of the Russo brothers, I was on a desert island and I could have, like I said, one frame of film from Taxi Driver or the entire collected body of work of the Russos, I would take that one frame of film. Scorsese is a giant. He's going back to this idea of auteur filmmaking. He actually embodies auteur filmmaking. And when the Russos decided to talk shit about Martin Scorsese, let's just say that they lost a lot of friends. But if they were still making amazing movies, then I think people would just shrug it off. But then they've also made some really weird comments recently about AI, where they suspect that in the next couple of years, we'll be watching AI feature films. And it's enough now where I'm starting to wonder, are the Russo brothers willfully and deliberately trying to destroy the art form of movies, knowing that they can never replicate their earlier successes? Like almost like they'll get a pass because the whole art form is in decline. Because when you look at the success or lack thereof of Gray Man, Citadel, and now the Electric State, it's like hiring employees who show up, who demand a really high salary, and then they go about single-mindedly trying to destroy your company. They tried to destroy Amazon with Citadel. Now they're trying to destroy Netflix with these movies. Like, what the hell is going on? And Netflix is already doing their fair bit when it comes to trying to destroy the art form of movies. And just judging by their slate, you could say, what are we doing here? But I've always found their total animosity toward the theatrical experience to be a little bewildering. I get it. Their business model is all about subscriptions, but it would just be extra free money for people who want to enjoy a movie like, enjoy in quotes, a movie like Rebel Moon or The Electric State on the big screen. I went to this very obscure theater chain called Epic Theaters, where they don't even advertise their movies or what's playing on Fandango. The only reason I even knew the movie was playing in a theater at all is that I read a review of the film where they said it's playing in limited theatrical release. I was like, limited theatrical release? I live in New York. We've got more movie theaters than any other city in the Western Hemisphere. It's got to be playing somewhere. But it was not listed on Fandango. I did a random Google search, the Electric State Manhattan tickets, and I found this theater where there were two other people sitting in the theater. I was like, all right, I guess I'm watching the latest Russo Brothers movie with two other people. Whereas when I went and saw Endgame in the theater, it was like a big giant IMAX theater, packed, people screaming, losing their goddamn minds. It was a very different experience. And their weird public comments continue with their attitude towards AI, because on one hand, they say that we'll be watching AI 90-minute features in the next couple of years. I'm like, well, if movies are as bad as The Electric State, well, then AI can't possibly be worse. But once again, it just feels like everything they're saying and doing is trying to usher in an era where movies no longer matter, or movies are no longer a part of the culture, where movies are more expensive than ever, more unwatchable than ever, and perhaps not even made by human beings. It just seems like all their instincts right now and all their impulses and everything that's driving them, it's all in the wrong direction. But as I was watching The Electric State yesterday and enduring all the idiotic dialogue or listening to the most obvious basic needle drops that you could possibly imagine, I kept thinking to myself, like, this movie, it's not even really a movie. It's like the antithesis of movies, or the antithesis of cinema. Because for me, movies, the art form that I love dearly. On its best day, it's about telling stories that people will love, that will withstand the test of time. Movies that'll have a very long shelf life, where you talk about it with your friends, you show it to your children or your younger siblings, and they remain a part of like the culture and our collective consciousness for many, many decades. That for me is movies. That's why I have a channel on YouTube devoted to discussing movies. The Electric State feels disposable and forgettable, and it's almost like it's deliberately designed for children who have bad taste, who think the Russos are still capable of making a good movie, or perhaps they might have been kicked in the head by a mule at one point, and they're just not very demanding, where they just need to pass the time for 2 hours before they can get back to their lives. But in that the movie's trying in its own feeble way to deliver a message that it's important to embrace reality and fellow human beings, touch grass, as the old expression goes, like take off the headset, stop looking at the phone, and interact with the world. It actually is trying to deliver that message, once again, in its own pitiful, pathetic way. But you would think that if that is their message, they would choose, or they would try with a more emotionally impactful, more memorable movie, because obviously if you're trying to deliver a message, if you have a better messenger, well, then perhaps your message will resonate. But if your movie is completely, totally limp and bland and generic and predictable, guess what? People are probably not going to listen too closely to whatever message might be buried beneath all just the fucking garbage in this movie. This movie is a love song to so much garbage, whether it's garbage food or garbage pop culture.
I am not dying of Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch!
But for a brief shining moment at the beginning of the movie, I actually fooled myself into thinking it actually might be kind of cool. It opens up with one of those 5-minute montages kind of explaining the history of this alternative world, where from like the 1950s to the 1990s, you had all these giant robots in service of society before this big war. But that stuff was actually okay. It reminded me a little bit of the opening to Pacific Rim, where we get the voiceover narration about the arrival of all the kaijus and the creation of the Jaegers to fight them and that sort of thing. But I enjoy a good apocalyptic, sci-fi war, dystopian war, etc. and so forth. But then the movie settles into the characters and the interactions, where with each and every single scene, you'll find yourself wondering, how is it humanly possible that this incredibly successful quartet of filmmakers who's made so many hit movies that people absolutely love and adore and have watched many times over, I mean, Winter Soldier and fucking Civil War and Infinity War and Endgame, I have no idea how many times I've watched those movies, but it's plenty. And it's like they are deliberately leaving out all the things that make them distinctive or exciting as storytellers, where with every scene, it almost feels like they told Chris Pratt, you know what, we kind of forgot to write a screenplay. Can you just make up some Chris Pratt sounding dialogue with a little sarcasm, like say dude a lot, make a few references to like, songs by Journey, but then people will think they're watching a good movie, but it's just going to be a facsimile of a good movie. But the movie also has this problem where at its core, the place where the beating heart of the movie, all the emotion is supposed to be, is just this yawning void, this huge vacuum of nothingness, because the character of Michelle and her relationship with her brother Christopher, that's supposed to be what drives the movie, because she's trying to reunite her brother, the brother she thinks is dead, with his body. But because the character Christopher can't talk through the robot, all he can do is like kind of fall back on certain catchphrases that the robot was able to use due to its previous programming. You never actually get emotionally invested in the character of Michelle and Christopher in their relationship until the very end. They kind of shove him into the movie, and I might as well get into some mild spoilers here, but the technology or the world building of this movie, none of it makes sense, because somehow we're supposed to imagine this kind of retro future 90s environment where giant robots are real and these virtual reality headsets are real, but people are still using like early 90s email, and that somehow this little boy's brain is so special and so overpowered and so brilliant that if you remove his brain from the overall apparatus of all the virtual reality, all the robots controlled by humans will be completely shut down. But the movie's trying to be really high-tech and really low-tech all at once, because the villain, played by Stanley Tucci, who's basically like a Steve Jobs figure, anytime he has a meeting with somebody, it's always in this virtual environment that's like, basically a $300 million special effects-driven virtual reality. It's like, all right, so technology's gotten really advanced. And yet somehow if you unplug the body of this one little boy, the entire apparatus or the entire infrastructure of all of his achievements will all come crumbling down. If you want to sell that as your world, fine, but you have to do a much more convincing job of it. And I don't know to what degree the bad ideas come from the source material. I'm just going to assume all the bad ideas come from this filmmaking team. But like I said before, I can't remember any time in all the years that I've been alive on this planet where I've soured on a team of filmmakers so severely, where I've lost all confidence in their impulses as filmmakers. That'd actually make an interesting video where you talk about like when filmmakers go bad, like when Peter Jackson started making those Hobbit movies. I was like, ugh, but it wasn't nearly as severe as the emotions I'm feeling toward the Russos. What would be another example? Zack Snyder with the Rebel Moon movies. I was like, ugh, like what are you doing here? Like, it is possible for filmmakers to suddenly fly off the rails. Or Robert Zemeckis, he's a filmmaker where I grew up loving his stuff and now I absolutely despise his stuff. But what's alarming here is just how quickly I have turned. It basically has taken half a decade for two of the most successful filmmakers in the world, filmmakers where I eagerly would look forward to each and every release of all their movies, where now I'm just openly dreading whatever the future might hold for their careers. And let me offer yet another spoiler warning, because at the very end of the movie, the Russos have the audacity to steal for themselves, where they try to create an Avengers Endgame final battle, and it's pathetic, where you have all these robots where we barely know their names or their abilities. Like, there's no emotional investment of any kind in any of these robots, and yet we're supposed to get this deep swell of emotion as all the robots go to war with all the kind of the automatons controlled by humans. And at the middle of it is Chris Pratt yelling out catchphrases and blah, blah, blah. The battle, the action, it just sucks. There's nothing there. And then the battle has the goddamn gall to end on one of the most annoying lines that is used by writers today, where the robot buddy to Chris Pratt says to him, well, you spoke your truth. Let me, once again, zoom in on me here. If you're a writer, whether you're writing books or shows or movies, there's no such thing as his truth or her truth or your truth. They can have their point of view, they can have their perspective, they can have their experiences, they can have their opinion. There is the truth. And maybe somebody's opinion of the truth or idea of the truth is wrong, but there's only the truth. There's no your truth, his truth, blah, blah, blah. And so anytime I hear a writer employing that line, I'm like, all right, you are dead to me moving forward. And so I'm just left with the question of, who's this movie made for? Because when you have all these giant robots with the big smiley faces and whatnot, you think, oh, okay, it's a movie for kids. You got Mr. Peanut and all these characters from like the 1950s and 1960s. I don't know how much nostalgia there is for these characters like Mr. Peanut, but if we want to give the movie the benefit of the doubt, I mean, I can remember the Mr. Peanut advertising logo, but I was never like, oh, dude, what I really need is a fictionalized shared universe featuring Mr. Peanut and all of his allies. And anyway, I don't give a damn about any of these stupid fucking robots that are featured so prominently in the movie, but maybe they thought perhaps kids might like the design of all these robots. But then the tone of the movie has much more gravitas, and it's taking itself really seriously, and like the battle scenes are, kind of graphic and intense, and every once in a while Chris Pratt will say shit or fuck or whatever. It's one of those movies that's PG-13, but kind of is like pretending to be a hard R action movie. And so it's not nearly adult enough or hardcore enough to appeal to adults, but it's not nearly innocent and sweet and kind of good-natured enough and inspiring enough to appeal to kids. It's just kind of lost in this strange no man's land. And I cannot think of a better example or a more overt example of filmmakers losing their way in such a short period of time. It's almost like the success of Endgame broke the brains of these filmmakers, where they don't even know what a story is anymore or what a movie is anymore. They just assume, oh, well, if it's got our names on it, people will watch it like a bunch of mindless zombies like those featured in The Electric State. And I'm just going to draw a line in the sand now and say, yeah, like this is where whatever your agenda is, it must stop, and you must regroup and rethink your entire approach to filmmaking, because it's just not working. But if I had to sum up what I perceive as the overall filmmaking philosophy in just a few words, it would be, they seem to be operating under the false assumption that the audience is exclusively composed of people who can only pay attention to movies for 10 seconds at a time, and they want nothing but junk food served up by AI. But like, news alert to the Russo brothers, the audience is vast and complex, and people like a wide variety of forms of entertainment. And this anti-cinema, or this anti-movie, or this antithesis of storytelling basics that you seem to be embracing, it is the most self-defeating attitude towards movies that I've seen in the movie business ever. But just to end this video on a positive note, I want to give a shout out to another entertainment product with a ton of overlap with the electric state, but delivered in a far superior fashion, and that is the Korean video game, The Lies of P. I've heard some people call it The Lies of Pi. I've heard some people as a joke say it's The Lies of P. The Lies of P, loosely based on the story of Pinocchio, but it's basically a grown-up version of Pinocchio who has a bunch of fucking weapons and a robotic arm going to war with all these crazy giant robots. Giant robots that are far cooler than the giant robots featured in the electric state. But it's atmospheric and it's imaginative and the gameplay's incredible. It's basically asked the question, what if Dark Souls and Pinocchio collided and was turned into this really cool Korean video game? And it has a DLC coming out this summer, which I'm really looking forward to. But I started playing The Lies of P the night before I saw the electric state. So maybe that helped create such a negative impression of the electric state. But I came home last night, and instead of reviewing the electric state, I was like, you know what? I need to wash the taste out of my mouth of this fucking movie. And I played The Lies of P all goddamn night. It's awesome. And if you're looking for any evidence that that video games have a massive advantage right now over big budget blockbuster sci-fi movies, it would be the compare and contrast between The Lies of P and the electric state. So that is going to be where I draw this video to a close. Check out The Lies of P. It's got some pretty tough, brutal parry mechanics, but once you lean into them, you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. But there it is. Those are my feelings about the electric state. I feel like if you're morbidly curious about terrible movies, definitely check it out. It reminds me a little bit of that new Meghan Markle show, which she's trying to become the next Martha Stewart. I was talking to my sister and my mother earlier today. They hate Meghan Markle, but they love this new show because it's so bad and so catastrophically awful. They have fun watching it. Maybe some people will have fun laughing at the electric state, but it's not overtly bad enough where you can kind of have a few beers and just kind of and laugh at all the stupid shit. It's just soul-killing and hope-killing because the filmmakers used to be so effective and so strong in terms of their overall filmmaking talents. And it's depressing to see this incredible team just disintegrating into total oblivion and mediocrity. And so, as I said at the beginning of the video, Section 31 is a worse movie, but given the expectations for these filmmakers, clearly at this point, The Electric State is the worst movie that 2025 has to offer. And I seriously doubt that any movie will prove to be a rival in the months to come, but who knows? The movie business is in such bad shape right now, perhaps the worst is yet to come. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Would love to hear your thoughts about the career trajectory of the Russo brothers and what your hopes or lack thereof might be for Doomsday and Secret Wars. But that's all I've got to say for now. Hope everybody has a great weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.